it's really about helping people create a life on their terms, taking control of things they don't understand or know because they're not doing it day to day. They don't have the education or haven't got the experience, and it's a very complex world with the tax system in Australia. There's legislation, there's the lending rules and different credit policies through to economics and different investment strategy structures, all the way through to different, trust funds, company entities, ownership of assets, right? So it's a very complex world to navigate. And all we want to do is just go, what is the outcome? What are you trying to create? What are the meaningful experiences you want to have in life? And who do you want to share those experiences with, right? So most things in our journey on life, there's a timeline, and it's the intensity of happiness is normally about how frequent you have happy moments and how intense those happy moments are.
Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show for Australians who want to learn how to unlock their full self, health and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom and to live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life that you really want. Let's get started.
Hi, freedom fighters. Do you feel stuck? You know that deep down you know that you want to live a better life, but you feel trapped, frustrated and stuck in a rut and just don't know how to shift the needle. Or you've wanted to improve your money management and start investing, but something just keeps holding you back. Or you've secured one or more properties and invested in other things, but you're stuck because you just don't seem to have the ability to do any more. If this is you, then you've landed in the right place today, as we're going to help you to start the unsticking process on your way to achieving your version of freedom and success. And to set the scene, let me start by sharing the story of the monkeys and the ladder that I borrowed directly from our great new book. You see, some years ago, a bunch of researchers placed 5 monkeys in a cage with a ladder in the middle that led to a bunch of bananas hanging from the top. Whenever a monkey tried to climb the ladder, the researchers sprayed them all with a fire hose of freezing cold water, which, surprisingly, they're not really into. And after repeated soaking, some of the monkeys got fed up and stopped trying to go for bananas at the top of the ladder, and in fact stopped going near the ladder at all. And if any other monkey attempted to climb the ladder, they'd try to stop it. And soon, they all stopped going for bananas and avoided the ladder completely. It just wasn't worth the struggle. Then the researchers removed one monkey and replaced it with a new one. And, naturally, the newbie smelt the right bananas and tried to climb the ladder, but the others quickly stopped him by throwing him onto the ground and attacking him out of fear, a fear that only the original monkeys understood. The newbie quickly learnt that the ladder was off limits, but he just didn't know why. The researchers then repeated the process of replacing the original monkeys with others, and each newbie quickly learnt not to mess with the ladder. Eventually, none of the original monkeys remained, yet none of them dared to go for the bananas. They didn't understand why none of them would even attempt to climb the ladder anymore, but they knew that if they went near it, they'd be in for a beating. Now, that's the way it had always been from the beginning for these replacement monkeys. Everyone knew the ladder was forbidden. But why was it forbidden? The problem is, the monkeys didn't challenge the status quo, and sadly many humans fall into the same trap. None of the replacement monkeys ever experienced being fire-hosed with cold water, but they'd all fallen in line with the established culture within the cage. They'd accepted that the rules are the rules, even if they didn't know why they existed, and even if they didn't make sense. And to a fair extent, we're all like monkeys in the cage. We live in a time of unquestioned compliance, where there's so many rules, regulations and systems in place, many of which don't even make a lot of sense, but we don't spend any time analysing them, and we've been conditioned to blindly accept them. From the smallest things to the biggest things, like how we live and work, we find ourselves blindly doing whatever our parents did, which has become an unconscious behaviour that likely came from their parents and so on. The truth is that our closest circle of people, the monkeys, can have a massive influence on our behaviours, which is why surrounding ourselves with the right people is really critically important, because the behaviours we can unconsciously adopt can be the most dangerous, as they quietly enter our lives and can shift our thinking without us even realising it. How often do we stop and ask, why? Is this right? Now, it's something that I personally take for granted, as I'm always questioning why, as a way to change and improve. And you just need to ask my wife, Sonia, or is it actually drives her bananas with my constant why this, why that? Now, you might notice that your little unconscious learnt behaviours are more noticeable when you actually move in with a new partner. Likely, you both have different ways of doing things based on your household and what you did growing up. Now, there's nothing wrong with either of these, but it's important to recognise that some of our behaviours just aren't logical. Some of our society's rules aren't logical. Some of the systems we live by and adopt just don't make any sense. The education system, our financial system, our system of government, do they all make complete sense? Probably not. Is this the best that we can do? Or are we just simply sleepwalking as we carry on the momentum of our old, outdated traditions? Are we merely slaves to the culture that we were born into? Now, I'm not saying that every rule or system is BS, but I am saying we should be questioning everything and forming our own conclusions. So the first step to getting unstuck and breaking a bad habit is recognising that our unconscious habitual thinking and our on-flowing actions actually exist. Then the next step is to decondition yourself and gradually replace that bad habit under bad association with better ones. Because at the end of the day, we're all pack animals and we all need to get along. We need to be a community. We need to have a social group and we need to feel accepted. It's actually hardwired into us. We need to be part of a tribe. In prehistoric times, we all lived in small groups. If you are outcast from the tribe, this was virtually a death sentence, which is why we're so anxious to fit in and feel accepted by the people around us. And if we lack self-belief that leads to bad habits that mean we end up spending time with the wrong people, we just get more of the same, as we may be accepted, but we end up feeling very stuck. As Lao Tzu famously said, our thoughts become words, our words become actions, actions become habits, habits become character, and character becomes destiny. So take a minute to step back and have a long, hard think about who do you really need to become. Because you may need to do a drastic environmental shift and break out of your current tribe in order to break the chain. And breaking and resetting the past momentum of your life ain't easy. But if you really want a better life, then it's likely that you have no choice. As you'll hear today from the personal experience of our special guest, disengaging from negative people, environments and situations is something you need to be able to handle if you really want to be successful, whatever that means to you. On your path to success, you may have to level up and become a better version of yourself several times. And in the process, you'll need to let people out of your life who project their negativity and insecurities onto you. And this is never easy, but at times is absolutely necessary. You can't stress this enough. It's how I've managed to take the big shift transitions from being an architect to a change manager to day trader to property investor to property manager to finance broker to property investment strategist, author, and now podcast host. Each one of these shifts was hard and challenging as I broke the shackles of my thinking and behaviours and left my old world behind and embarked on new initiatives with new people and new environments. So how serious are you about breaking the chains and doing what has to be done to realise your dreams? Because at the end of the day, when you lie down at night, you're the one who has to deal with your thoughts and your conscience around the decisions and the choices that you've made. There's no one else to blame, just you. No one else is going to carry the burden. If changing yourself, your circle and your environment is the right decision for you, then that's what you need to do. Otherwise, you'll live a life of regret and bitter disappointment. But there's no denying that when you do make a big environment shift, you leave a lot behind. You leave behind all the people who inadvertently pushed you in that direction and then kept you there. So when this happens, you also need positive people pulling you forward. You need to have a new tribe that's ready and willing to take you in. Otherwise, you're in for a sad, bad and lonely time. And you're more likely to be tempted to return to your old tribe and bad habits because that's where your acceptance, comfort and support have been. Your old life and your old habits will keep dragging you back. And as I've often said, if you swim in a septic tank for long enough, you're going to get a mouthful of shit. So you need to dive into a new clean pool. You only get one ride on this crazy adventure called life. So the key is to find new friends who are more aligned with your interests and the direction you want to go, so that you can form new thoughts, habits and outcomes. And this is where today's great guest, Kane Hansen, comes in. As you're about to hear, Kane has made these hard and drastic shifts in his life on numerous occasions on his steep road to his version of success. So despite a very hard and challenging early start to life, along with many major shifts and changes on his journey so far, Kane's now a financial planner or advisor, a business owner, entrepreneur, and a big proponent of giving back. As a founding advisor of True North Lifestyle, he now helps you and others from all walks of life to take control of your finances by focusing on smart money management to create financial freedom and build your dream life. He believes that everyone should have the opportunity to develop strong financial literacy. So to help you and others master your finances, he's created the True North Academy, educational platform that teaches you everything from basic budgeting to how to play the money game and win. And he's just released his book, Find Your True North, that I've really enjoyed reading. And we're going to unpack this in detail in next week's episode. So I'm really looking forward to being further inspired and motivated by Kane's personal story today. So welcome, and let's get invested, Kane.
Hey, Bushy, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about the book, talk about my journey, and hopefully inspire some of your listeners.
Have no doubt, and everything I've shared there is a direct take from the inspiration from your book, and it's a really good and engaging read. I love the way you sort of keep us entertained with that. So, but I guess for those that haven't been fortunate enough to get to know you yet, Kane, can you sort of kick off by telling us what you do differently, and more importantly, why you do what you do?
Well, today, our core business is about finances and financial planning, but for us, we don't look at it as financial planning. We look at it trying to educate Australians, providing simplified options. And it all comes down to what's the outcome we want to achieve. And that's why we call True North Lifestyle. We had the option to call it True North Private Wealth. We could have been True North Financial Services. And we intentionally went for True North Lifestyle because what we do is help people create lifestyle goals. That's what you come for the outcome and the result from an advisor. And it's our job to do all the complex numbers and do all the options and strategies for you. So it's really about helping people create a life on their terms, taking control of things they don't understand or know because they're not doing it day to day. They don't have the education or haven't got the experience. And it's a very complex world with the tax system in Australia. There's legislation. There's the lending rules and different credit policies through to economics and different investment strategy structures, all the way through to different, trust funds, company entities, ownership of assets, right? So it's a very complex world to navigate. And all we want to do is just go, what is the outcome? What are you trying to create? What are the meaningful experiences you want to have in life? And who do you want to share those experiences with, right? So most things in our journey on life, there's a timeline, and it's the intensity of happiness is normally about how frequent you have happy moments and how intense those happy moments are. And it's about experiences of having dinner, and then it's like going out to dinner or a holiday, but it's like who you're doing that with, a wife, a partner, a child, a friend. So we just want to drill into those, the vision, the meaningful outcome. What do you need to support that outcome, and give a monetary dollar value and work back from that outcome using strategy, structures and goals and metrics to run the numbers around that, and just simplify things and say to the client, hey, here's 2 or 3 options to get to that outcome. Here's different ways to do it, different investments. Those investments have different pros and cons, and easily just say to a client, it's option A, B, or C, and this is how they'll get you there, right? And that's what drives me. And the reason that drives me is, when I drill more down into my story, there was a point in my life where I didn't think change was possible. Coming from the conditioning of a middle class to eventually lower class family with a divorced household relationship, and then a sick mother, which we'll drill down a bit more into. But those things just limited my belief system, right? And I didn't think change was possible. And I think a lot of people can't see through the woods, and they don't see that there is a better option out there. And then we always default from fear back to what we know, right? And sometimes what we know isn't always what's best for us. And I really want to help people break free of that change and just see people excited that they actually can do more of their life, and there actually is a huge amount of potential. And a massive thing I highlight to my clients, and also in the book, it's I'm just an average guy, an average Australian, fairly average family. Divorce is quite high, unfortunately, but I'm not doing anything special. I just got really good at the financial sector and business, which was something I was passionate about. That's led me to where I am today, and that's what I want to inspire in other people.
Love it. There's a lot to unpack there, and I really enjoyed reading the book, because if you look at where you're at and what you're doing now compared with where you started, that's for most people, that's a big cliff to climb. I'd love for you now unpack some of that and sort of take us back on that journey from as early as you would like to start, and take us through those big transitions that you've worked your way through, and unpack why you made those transitions that now led you to where you are and what you're doing today, mate.
Yeah. Well, the book goes back to, it's been one of the youngest in a family of, I was the fifth son. But, there was four of us under the household at one time. Mum and Dad were together. Dad was a truck driver. He did long hours. He made good money. He did night shifts. There was danger money. Mum was a receptionist. She was home more often. Typical family environment. And then things were sort of reasonably good. I remember, like Christmas and family events. And, we were essentially middle class. But around 5, my parents got divorced. That was the first shock to separation of Mum and Dad. And Mum was trying to wear all the hats. Dad sort of drifted off in our environment, wasn't as around as often, but also the financial burden got harder with my mum with a receptionist sort of background and experience, because she was a stay-at-home mum, trying to look after 4 kids under the house by herself. She was the dad, the mum, the chauffeur, the drop off to sport. So it got real hard. I just remember that point, right? Budgeting became a big thing from memory looking back. We just lived off really low amount of income. And that was one of the big epiphanies I have looking back about learning to live off what you need, not what you want. And we can live off a lot less. And I think we're accustomed to spending more than we need to, which was a great lesson later on of living within my means. And I think some of us can easily go outside that. But there was a big shift there. And I noticed, obviously, if things got harder, we probably fell into a bit more of a lower class household on that one income. My mum kept the house that my dad and mum bought, and that led through to, through probably about 10 or 11 years old. And then my mother got sick, and, she didn't have life insurance and all these things that are quite important. And when you go through a real life experience of an illness or sickness, you realize the importance of that financial support that you can get, which is also something we address in our financial planning, right? And no one wants to action plan B. Plan B is there as a backup, right? We want to look forward to plan A. And unfortunately, there was no plan B. Mum got sick and had to redraw on the mortgage, and things got quite hard. And the structure at home and the routines and the sort of role model system that we had as kids fell apart. And I was entering pretty much high school at the time, and Mum had cancer. And I just tended to go down the wrong path. There was not conversations around the dinner table when I was 10 or 11 talking about, my results from the exam at school, and thinking about what school I wanted to go to, like a private school or even any selective school or career progression, those things that we get in our environment in a healthy household that can be instilled on us. And I just think through my high school years, I just sort of went off track, right? And I started hanging out with naughtier kids. I become disruptive. I didn't have the support at home. The household income was definitely lower. There was a lot of struggle through those years. I was probably a bit rebellious, chuck in some hormones as a teenage boy, and you got a recipe for disaster. Mum wasn't really able to provide the support. And also the school system is not qualified and trained to deal with those things, and they're already underpaid, under-resourced to begin with. And one of the most important jobs of educating the future children of tomorrow, or the adults of tomorrow, and I can't give them enough grace for what they do, and they should get a lot more support from the government. But that aside, I fell through the cracks, right? The system essentially failed me, not because of the teachers, it's just because of the way it's trying to hold itself together.
Yeah.
And then this just led from one bad decision to another. I got in a bad circle, hung out with the wrong kids. I was getting suspended from school. And then I decided to get more and more limiting beliefs that I probably wasn't going to finish school. People started to say maybe you should leave school at year 10 and maybe you should get out of here early. And then you stop thinking I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, because you're like, well, I'm not going to go to university. And then essentially I started limiting my future internally. And then eventually I got kicked out of school. I became too disruptive for the school system, and I was placed in Boys Town, which is a home, essentially a home that you live at for delinquent juveniles. It was probably the best thing that happened to me. Had a lot of structure, a lot of support. They had the resources to cater to kids that just needed to sort of understand their own emotions and get a bit of clarity and structure. And the discipline there was amazing, looking back around learning how to cook and being domesticated, hygiene as a teenage boy doesn't have sometimes, changing your sheets every week and washing them and just things of day-to-day life, but they're just good things that provide discipline. And then that led on to another journey in itself.
Yeah, let's go there, mate. Let's because
you want to keep going.
Yeah, I'd like I'd like to get to the low point and but pretty much the moment that changed it, when you started to change your direction. Because I think pretty good learning.
There's always a bit of I feel, and I do a lot of work with youth programs now. It's one of the big parts of giving back because of my story, and I try and pinpoint this for myself. And it's a very, very hard to pinpoint. There's normally a big shift or an epiphany or an event that shifts people. I sort of had a few slight incremental shifts. Like Boys Town, there was a big influence there from one of the internal counsellors, Jared. He was a surfy guy, male role model, used to play football, and I looked up to him. I didn't have a father figure around. He said some quite influential things to me. Get that one out. To me around, what type of character and person I wanted to be. So before trying to get me to make big goals or what career I wanted to do, he drilled down into what type of person do I want to be when I grow up? What type of human do I want to be? What values do I want to instill? And the way he weaved that into my teenage brain for a young male, he sort of slipped it in the back door, planted the seed, and it was around me trying to incentivize me of what type of girl I'd want to date, which all teenage boys probably focus 80% of their thoughts on, finding a girlfriend, I suppose, or a partner at that age, and then filling the rest of the time with video games and probably sport. But to be honest, but he just sort of slid in and said, well, what type of girl you want? And he created this story and got in my head, and it made me start to really think about the type of girl you'd want. And you'd always dream up this amazing version of the girl that you want to date or marry. And then he said, well, what type of guy do you think that girl would want to meet? And then I sort of started to balk at the question because I could see where he was leading me. And then I started to reflect on that ideal person or the character and values of that guy in the future that would be a perfect fit for this partner I desired. And he also said, what sort of partner you'd want for your sister or your daughter, and try to get me thinking. And it really just planted a seed to come out later on, but that really started to get me thinking about the character and values of how I held myself as a person. And then I left Boys Town and completed my Year 10 through different channels. I was still the education standard Year 10 certificate. And then I had to go and get jobs, and coming from Boys Town on your resume and before I had a license wasn't really the ideal candidate. And I went for sort of blue collar jobs and got into electrical because I was good at math. And my mum's like, oh, you're good at numbers, go do that. And I couldn't afford to actually go into my HSC, nor did anyone think I'd probably pursue anything with reason. So in their defense. And I went from job to job, and in the book I refer to them as shitty jobs, but I don't mean the jobs aren't good. It's more the jobs weren't right for me, and the mindset at that point in my life, I felt like I probably wanted something more, and I just didn't know what it was. And there's always been a bit of an entrepreneurial flair in me. I've always, seen myself of not working for someone. I've always wanted to sort of go out and create and build something, and sort of had that in school. And I think that's why I sort of didn't fit the structured curriculum of school. I was always challenging the status quo, which I thought was a good thing, but the teachers didn't. So, and that led to just trying to find jobs and find my place, and I wasn't really getting any traction anywhere. But there was a couple of big things in my life too. There was my mum's sister, my auntie. She married someone that she met at university, but ended up becoming a banker. I talk about Uncle Keith in the book, and he was a banker and big on investments. And every Christmas dinner or family birthday that we had, I'd try and get close to Keith and pick his brain, because I started to notice when I was working at some of these jobs, I think in the book I was talking about the one with the wholesale tire warehouse, and there was a guy who used to come in, he used to sit on top of the office. There was like a mezzanine floor, and then it had an office, and then there was like a rooftop on top of that mezzanine floor, and he'd come in and smoke his cigars in that because the smoke would obviously just go out into the warehouse, and he'd drive in and pull up in this fancy sport car and then sit up there and read his paper and do work from there with this cigar. And I remember wheeling around the ties in the warehouse thinking, man, how does this guy get to sit up there? Like, and I started to notice these little clues. I was like, well, this guy's gotten to that point. He's the top dog. Yeah, he's the boss man. He's the guy that's driving the nice car, smoking the cigars. Yeah, probably not for me, but hey, it looked cool at the time. I'm not a smoker. But, you know, I'm seeing this guy in this image, and I started to, like, see there was little clues on the wall of these people. There was Uncle Keith, the banker, and I picked his brain. He said, I went to university, ended up, I think he got 3 degrees in the end. He had an economics degree. He ended up doing psychology, and then he did behavior finance. So extremely educated guy, really successful in the end. You know, he was really successful in shares and done quite well. And I started to see these clues, and I started to get my mind thinking, but I just didn't know where to start. I didn't know where to go next, and I was still stuck in these jobs. And then there was the other side of the world I was exposed to, because when I was hanging out with all these kids in Boys Town and hanging out with the kids that would get in trouble at school, it was a completely different side of the coin. It was the not so nice things in life. I was exposed to housing commission. I lived in housing commission for a bit of a girl I met, and I was exposed to real low forms of poverty and dysfunctional family lives, and just what goes on in a completely different world. And from a lower class family, that was a big shock to me. And it was a really big realization that there was some really, really nice people, good values in that world. But comparing that to the Uncle Keith or the cigar smoking boss at the tire warehouse job, then there was another world I got exposed to, and I started to hang around, and I ended up working for a guy named Turkish Mick. And Turkish Mick was obviously Turkish to begin with, but he was actually friends with John Abraham. I think they went to school together. Turkish Mick, when I say I work for him in the capacity as an air conditioning electrician. Yeah. But he was involved with all the nightclubs for John Abraham and some of the other silent partners. And I was working on the nightclubs during the day, working at John's house, big house in where the Dover's Heights, Vaucluse or somewhere over there. I won't say his address, but it's probably a bit confidential. Yeah. But yeah, I started to see these guys in a different world, and then I started to go, well, what are the clues for these guys? I was probably about 17, 18 at the time, so I was a little bit naive. Yeah. It was all before Underbelly come on TV, and I seen these guys own nightclubs, and they were driving Ferraris, and I was like, hey, they're entrepreneurs. There might be more to it than that behind the scenes, but they were exposed to a different world where the rules were a bit different and they weren't educated. And then I had friends that I was hanging out with, that I grew up with, that were leaning towards that path because it was the easy money, right? It maybe wasn't the ethical path, and it probably wasn't the right character. And I was stuck between these two worlds as a young man from like 17, 18, 19, 20 of, I can't really make good money working in this warehouse job or working in electrical jobs as an apprentice. And I was just trying to work out how to get ahead. I knew I wanted more. I knew I wanted something better for myself. I wanted to be that guy with a good character that meets the amazing girl and has a good family structure that I never had. And, I wanted to tick all the boxes in life. Boys Town instilled health into me and disciplines like that you talk about. Health, it was like fitness, healthy minds, good physical actions and behaviors. And I started to pick up on those things. And then another big key moment was a book that my mum just randomly bought from a bookstore with the famous Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. And everyone knows that book that sort of goes down the rabbit hole of trying to find the way of their finances or self-development. And that book changed my life. It really just made me reflect on my Uncle Keith. There's the other entrepreneurial way. Looking at sort of the underworld approach, I started to realize there was a bit more to it than the surface. And a couple of kids I grew up with that I would say acquaintances at the time, sort of on the same path, really pursued that different direction heavily. And it didn't play out well. And I talk about it in the book. There was a guy named, his name was different, but we call him Ricky in the book. He actually got caught up really deep coming from housing commission. Dad was in jail and unfortunately just took the wrong path early. and did a bit more damage than probably would have liked. And he ended up getting himself in an altercation and was shot and got seriously injured. He did live from that event, but I remember where I was at the time, and I got a phone call and was notified of the incident when he was still in hospital. I don't know if he was out of the critical stage at that point. And that's what I was looking down the barrel of. I was like, if you keep hanging around and thinking this life is fun and exciting and cool, which a lot of young men get caught up in, chasing the shiny object, and it's not the right character. It's a very dark path, and I got a shock from that event really quickly, and I had to step back, and I just looked at my life, Bushy, and I was like, my mother instilled better values. They were hardworking parents. They had a few unfortunate events that happened. I was doing stupid things as a teenager, just got caught up with the wrong crowd. I've read the Rich Dad Poor Dad book. I started to believe there was a path. Had my uncle Keith there that was educated, but I still just didn't know what to do. How did I get out of the role I was in with the blue collar jobs? How do I start to make progress to being an entrepreneur? But that really just made me step back and say, I have to change. Something had to change. And I was living in Sydney, my life. I was born in Sydney. I was growing up, and this is where the big shift of your environment and your social circle is so important, because even though I try to avoid those people, you still get the phone call on a Saturday, hey, come hang out, and you'll be like, oh yeah, I'll just go out for a bit. I won't get involved in the stuff they're doing. But then they was what I used to call friends back then, and I was associated with them. And there probably weren't people that you'd really trust, right? And it was just a hard point in life, and that's why I think you talk about action too, and taking actionable steps, and change is really hard. But I felt like not changing could have been worse, the path that I could have headed down. And then I seen Ricky go down. And then I knew I had to change. My mum obviously beat cancer. It was a miracle, stage 4. She was a good woman. I had siblings that also needed, a younger sister at the time. I was the youngest of all the brothers, and, just trying to do the right thing. And, I come across 2 really good friends I talk about in the book, Bo and Denny, and they were still from, single mother households, but they just chose a better path. They were hardworking, and they just rubbed off on me a lot. And eventually there was an opportunity to go out to a mining town up in Northern Territory, Gove, the Nullarbor, red dirt everywhere. It wasn't great money for the fly-in, fly-out role. It was like bottom entry. It was probably not much better than Sydney, but I had no cost, and I could escape my environment. And that's when it all changed. It was unbelievable, the change. When you have enough time and less distractions available, it was before social media was probably as full on as it is now. And I just read books. I became a consumer of knowledge. I went through like a book every week, every second week. I read on the bus to the mine every morning. It was a 30-minute ride. Read on the way home. I read on our 2 breaks at the mine, smoko lunch and, smoko on lunch. I've read most of those breaks. I read on the flight out to the mine at the end of the break, the start of the break. So I consumed, and I just read books on anything I needed to learn. And then I started to implement. I started, building up money, and then I went, well, I'm going to trade some of the money. I'm going to invest some of the money, and I got into Forex trading back before it was cool, back before they did 1 to 500 leverage. It was back when it was like 1 to 100 leverage contracts. I traded the European market because I'd work during the day. I'd come home from work about 6:30. The European UK market was kicking off. That was the best time to put your trades in. I had stock charts all over my little mining cabin. I had 2 big screens set up on a little laptop, and I had a trading room by night. I'd wake up with stop losses triggering, or profits triggering, trailing profits triggering at 1 or 2 in the morning. And I worked, and I just grinded it out. And it was because I had no one around me. I could just go back to retraining my brain, building myself up, building confidence through knowledge, and also applying that knowledge. And the journey, if you want me to continue, I can.
Well, no, I want to jump in there, because what is really evident from everything you've shared is that you have a ability to swim against the tide, Kane, which a lot of people don't. When they're caught up in that sort of group think and the pressure that goes with it, even in the mines in the territory, I'm sure that the rest of the guys would have been going, "What the hell are you doing, Kane? Why don't you come and have a beer with us at the whatever it is? You got your head down in the book, going hard."
Yep.
Where is that mental strength to be able to do what you need to do rather than get sucked in with what the pressure of the group and the culture of the group is imposed, mate? Is that something that's natural to you, or
that? I've looked a lot into this from a psychology point of view, working with troubled youth, right? I've done a lot of work, and I've tried to work this out myself. Is it nurture or nature, right? And there's so much research on nurture and nature, and there's people that come from great families that go on to be serious criminals, and then there's people from the worst families that go on to be the most inspiring individuals in the world. And I don't think there is one clear answer. I think it's individual for everyone, that epiphany and change. And there's something in all of us, and I think you can ignite that spark. I think for me, being the youngest of the brothers, I was always a bit, had to be a bit strong-willed to be heard. And I think that carried through to my schooling. I was probably a bit strong with my voice in the school system, which made me disruptive. And then, it ended up determining my exit from the school system on bad terms. But I think that led through to just being able to challenge the status quo. And I say this to people: don't be influenced by others and what their thinking is. Normally they're projecting their own insecurities on you. But at the end of the day, you're the one that's got to be living with yourself alone in 20, 30, 40 years. And every decision you make is going to be the reality that you live in the future. And if you let someone else dictate those decisions, but you're the one that's got to live with that reality, that is just such a wrong way of thinking. Once I put that in perspective, it's like, yeah, they're sitting there bagging what I did, but they're not the ones that got to sleep in my bed and deal with the life that I create if I don't get out of this. And the mining sector was great money. And what I realized quick, one thing I was good as an observer, I'd sit back and watch the guys that have been there for years. They started to lose their relationships. They missed out on their children. I thought, I don't want to do that. As I want to get in here, I want to learn other skills. I want to get the money, build a base, and then I want to progress with something else. I didn't know what it was at first, but I knew I wanted more. And then I had to block out the noise, like you said. Often we got bagged out. Even Bo and Denny, the two guys I had, because we used to call ourselves the tripod. And you mentioned before the 3 legs, right? And we used to have this saying: if one of us wasn't around, we'd fall apart, because 3 of us were like glue. And we didn't drink. We'd go to the gym. We'd read. We'd go to the gym. We talked about investing. We shared investment ideas. We all bought property around the same time, our first properties, and then we progressed and wanting to do better. And it was good, I think, with that circle of having people that are also on the same path to block out the noise. And we got bagged out because we didn't drink after every shift. We didn't come for 1 or 2 beers. And then we got labelled the Metros from Sydney up in the mining town because, we actually liked to go to the gym and we ate healthy. We didn't eat always just, the heavy, the heavy sort of baked meals and deep fried meals in the kitchen.
Yep.
And we had to block that noise out. And I remember guys laughing when I had stock charts and they're like, "You'll never get out of here." And, I was scaffolding and rigging at the time. And there was a lot of noise. But I can't talk for all the listeners. I can't say this is the key thing. I think you got to find it in yourself. You got to find that passion. You got to hook into it. And I think a big thing for most people, it's like, who do you want to be in the future? Because if it comes back to your life and your family or just your future, that's got to get you motivated, because you're not motivated about your future. There's something going on and you need to recreate what that future looks like and bring something more exciting to the table.
Love it. I love the fact that that Serpy teacher at Boys Town actually got your creative imagination going to think about exactly who you want to be and how you want to live life in the future. Very few people take the time to do that. And the fact that you're still talking about it today tells me how formative he was in actually setting the direction for your life generally. Yes, you've got the discipline and the resilience to be able to go, right, that's where I want to go and that's what I'm going to do. But sowing that seed and then get crystal clear around exactly who you want to be and how you want to live, which again, very few people take the time. They chase the money, they chase this, or they go, oh, this is just how it is. Therefore I'm just going to fold over and cave in. You've had the ability to thread the needle on those things and then stick to the course and then make it happen, which I love. So I want to sort of now revert in specifically into your investment experience quickly, if we can, and just share what you invested in, why, what worked, what didn't, and talk to us a little bit about how your thinking around investment strategy changed. Because what I see with a lot of investors, Kane, is that they'll start off with one approach, and then over time, as their knowledge and their comfort level increases and their awareness of what they're doing and why they're doing it happens, that starts to modify. Can you talk us through why you invested to start with? What was it? And just take us through that whole journey so you get a sense of what that looks like.
Yeah. I'll break it down into two parts, because there was what I invested in before I was a financial planner.
Yep.
And then there's what I invested in after a financial planner. So I think the experience changed. And I'll talk about what worked for me, and obviously disclaimer, it's general advice only, and obviously seek your own professional advice for anything that's personal, because I think there's no one trick. I think the more exposure to get to other people's stories, you'll pick out things that might be attractive to you. And then I don't think go and do what they did. I think look into it, do your own research and relate it back to your vision. And like you said, if you have a clear vision, when something comes along as a shiny object, assess it, look at it, align it. Does this help me move towards the vision? Yes or no? If it's a no, don't entertain it more than you need to. It doesn't matter because the guy at the barbecue made a massive deal on something, or the taxi driver or Uber driver has killed it on this stock. Just, you got to learn how to block out the noise. That's a clear vision. So let's go back. So me, it was, I just had money coming in. I was a bit young and naive. I wanted to make money quick. So I was trading, Forex trading. You could leverage the contracts. The contracts were every $1,000 lot, you had 100,000 of currency exposure. So you could make, a couple of thousand in a day in a high volume market with the pips.
Or lose it in a day.
Correct. Correct. And you got to have the right fundamentals, and I can go a bit more into the fundamentals of day trading and any investment, which they talk about asymmetric risk, right? And it's a huge thing. It's not given enough entertainment, and it doesn't matter what asset class you're in, but I'll come back to it. And I got into that because I only had minimal money. I didn't have enough money for a deposit. There was a few first home buyer incentives at the time. I think back then it was only stamp duty waived. Now they've got a similar sort of structure and a few other benefits that they're kicking in from the government. So I was saving up for a deposit, and while I was doing that, I allocated a bit of money, and I was always good at a budget. I wasn't spending much money in the mine. I didn't really drink or smoke. Don't mind you, when I had my week off, I had a good nudge on the beers. But yeah, while I was in the mine, it was like, all work, no real play. I was head down, bum up, focused on discipline. But I started to get into trading because it's a quick way to make money. I learned a lot about economics, currency, political policies and changes that would affect market movements short term. But there was always fundamentals that gave a more intrinsic value, a more fundamental value long term. But there was short term psychology and market movements. And my uncle used to share a few insights in financial psychology around financial behavior that I started to pick a bit more when I actually knew what I was talking about, and not asking him a million questions and he was getting the shits and like, man, just let me have a glass of wine at Christmas. It started to have a bit more of an interactive, constructive conversation. Then I would go back and implement those things and listen. And it was always a learning journey. So I started with that, but day trading is extremely hard. Not many people make money out of it, right? Top 10% of something make money. And even the guys that make money, it's like 30, 40% of trades are successful. And then if you're like, well, if only 30, 40% of trades are successful, how do they make money? And it means we essentially got to have a 3-to-1 ratio of profit on the upside when you measure your downside stop loss, and you've got to reverse engineer the trade to get your numbers right. So if you're good at numbers, emotionless, essentially, and can have a methodical trading plan, you might make money. So I made a little bit. As the lot sizes got bigger, the emotion kicked in, it was hard. I saved up, I bought my first property. That first property, I made about $300,000 in, I think, 2 or 3 years. I bought in a southeast area of Sydney, bought for $450,000, walked in, first house I looked at, no one else went to look at it. It was painted salmon pink. I was with my girlfriend at the time. It's like, I'm going to buy this. She cried because she didn't really understand what it meant with the debt. I said, regardless of the tears, I'm buying this property. I went all in and I had the deposit, 5%. I put the money down, bought it, and I rented it out. I moved into the first home buyer rules. I think it was 6 months in the first 12 months.
That's it.
Moved in, ticked my box. Then I obviously wasn't there. I was in the mining town, rented it out, and you could rent it out for up to 6 years, get depreciation and negative gearing for up to 6 years before you lose that tax-free capital gains exemption.
Yep.
And we're renting it out, and that was one of the first investments I made. Tax-free money I made, it was over 300,000 on that. A couple of years later, I broke up with that girl and sold off some assets. But after that, I actually bought, the next thing I went into was probably another property. I moved to a mining town called Orange. I was renting. I had a dog. They didn't want any dogs out there when you're renting. I looked at the property market. I could buy an ex-housing commission house for 120,000 on a 600 square metre block. It was cheaper for the loan than it was to rent.
Exactly.
So I did the math, and I was working in a gold mine then. I changed mine site. I was on a lot more money. I built up my experience. I progressed, and I was on really, really good money after tax. And I bought the second property on my Sundays off. I've renovated the whole house, added like 100 grand value to it by renovating the property. I was still buying shares at this point. I moved into your blue chip stocks.
Yep.
And I started to get your buy and hold, your more dividend-based shares. Yep. I started to build up a few shares on the side, and then I had my property back in Sydney, and I had the property out in the mine site. And eventually I wanted to learn more about finances, right? So I really loved it, and then I went on to study financial planning. So it was 2 properties, and I made some really good money out of those. The shares, I made little bits of money. But when I left the mines, I went into an internship with the bank, and I had an 80% pay cut. So I went from, it's a few years ago too, going back nearly 15 years, probably 12 years when I left. I was on $3,500 a week in the hand after tax for a permanent gig that I had a week off every 3 weeks. And for someone in their mid-20s was plenty of money, and I didn't spend a lot. So I had all this money I was building up, but when I went into the internship, I had an 80% pay cut for after-tax income. So the shares I had to sell and manage to keep floating the 2 loans that I had on the properties, because I was negative cash flow. And that's the thing with negative gearing, right? It's not really, it's not as sexy as it sounds, is the words I use. Negative gearing means you lose money on an investment in the hope that the capital will appreciate more than the cash flow loss. And even on the highest tax bracket of, 47%, you're still out of pocket for every $100, $47 on every 100. So you need to factor in things like depreciation and things you'll learn along your own journey that I had to learn before I got into finance. And I come up to speed pretty quickly when I started calculating numbers. And I floated the properties. I sold some of the shares off to get through my internship. And I went into finance. And away I went like a bull out of gates, and had a crazy internship. I was the only guy in the intern that had no degree, and I was from like a mining background where you don't really write emails or you don't write anything. And I come in with a little bit of bogan in me, and it was a fun experience. So I'd go into more of that if you want. Or
talk to us a little bit about post-financial plan. What did your approach change, and what did you invest in, and how did that compare?
Perfect. Yeah. So I continued on. Once I got into financial planning, I had a really, really good mentor named Russell. In the book, he's called Russell. His legal name's different because I kept it quiet for certain reasons. We had a bad falling out based on values in the long run. Great mentor for business, great mentor for financial planning, insanely intelligent and successful guy. He bought businesses in financial planning.
Yeah.
So you'll see large corporations, anyone that gets into the stock market, you'll see big corporations do acquisition for scale. It significantly boosts top-end cash flow. It can boost your profit margins or your EBITDA, bottom line, your metrics that boost up the share price. Price per earnings on shares, and how all these methods are used for intrinsic valuation. Scaling is good for acquisitions, but a lot of big corporations do it and it works as long as they integrate it. And you said you did change management, Bushy, so the culture, the values, the transition of those businesses needs to have synergy. Yeah, correct. And there's numbers, and then there's the practical sense of implementing that merger. But he did it with smaller businesses, and the numbers just made sense to me. He showed me how to do that, how to do good financial planning, buy businesses from financial planning advisors that were probably on the way out, that probably neglected their clients a little bit or weren't as active, where there was a lot of opportunity as well as merging the revenue, keeping the good staff, getting rid of the dead wood, using efficiencies with processes, systems, technology to increase profit margins, to focus time on more value-adding services. And he just taught me that in a nutshell. And so when I had this separation with this girl I was with, I sold that property in Miranda, cashed in $300,000 profit, and I just thought, I'm going to dump it all in a business. And I was just had the support of this company I worked at. The deal was we'll go out and buy a business together. We bought like a $2.2 million practice together, and I ran that. So I went into business. And then once I got cash flow and profit up again, I ventured back into the property market. And I started to buy property. I did a bit of renovating of properties. And then eventually I went into years after that when I was building a good financial base and had a lot of profit in the business, had good cash flow. I had good equity. I went into doing duplexes. So I've actually developed property now, which was always a dream 15 years ago. I read a book in the Mines on property renovations. I read a book on property development. And I said to myself, I'd love to just develop property. And then I had to learn that, right? I had to go back to the book and learn that. So it was mainly property, and biggest return is probably business, but it's a hard asset to navigate, and it can come with its risk. Anything that has high correlation to growth and returns has high correlation to the negative side. But I think I had a good mentor to give me a base, and eventually I left that large practice, took my clients and founded True North Lifestyle, and have continued to do what we did was buy businesses, but also organic growth and social media, and we're attracting more clients from all different channels of client acquisitions. But still, buying businesses is one of the best ways to grow our business if the business is a right fit. So, and then secondary to that for passive income, I've chosen property. And I do still dabble in shares, but I use a strategy called debt recycling, which is using tax-deductible debt that's secured against equity to buy those shares. And I buy blue chip shares that have got 7 to 8% dividend yield that pretty much pay for the loan. So they're paying for themselves to pay for more shares. And I'm controlling my loan-to-value ratio, so I can still have opportunity for property. No property developments at the moment. I've got a young family. At the moment, my partner wants me to settle down, but I reckon 2 more years I'll be back out there looking for the next site.
We've only just scratched the surface, and we could talk for hours about this, but I know you're on a bit of a timeline today. If you were sort of reviewing your journey so far, then looking back at it, if you're starting out again, what, if anything, would you invest in differently, Kane?
Differently. I think I mentioned before, it's not anything differently. And I want to highlight this too. This is a big thing, and people need to know this. I made a lot of mistakes. I got burnt. I had some not even bad investments. I got scammed in one event. I was a bit naive, and I jumped into things a little bit young, and it was good to be savvy and young, but I think you need to find credible sources. I think you need to look into, does this service or product have any regulation around it? Is it licensed? Do they have the experience and credibility? Doing reviews on it? Just treading a little bit slower. And I think when I was earlier on, I rushed out because I was so keen to make my first million before 30. And I think I'd be a bit more diligent in my approach, but also be a bit more patient. That I did get there. I did, I got to that 7-figure plus status. Did it happen in this straight line that I hope? No, nothing ever does. You got to have realistic expectations, and you got to be adaptable. But I think if I went back, I'd probably not be as naive. And I ran into the quick, rich concepts to make this quick, or here's this booming property area that only one person has access to, and things that you look back, I thought, man, how did I believe that? And it's like there are booming suburbs, but there's data and backing, and I'm sure there's not only one person that has access to it. It's not like there's this whole hidden gem from anyone. And then the last thing to that would be just have a vision. Like, where do you want to go? Not where your friend wants to go. And say there's this investment, once you do your due diligence, once you know that it's sound and appropriate and safe and regulated, how does that fit in my plan? And does that push me towards it and tick the boxes I need? Not looking at how much can I make. Oh, it's got a 25% expected capital growth in this hot spot. Well, what does that actually mean? Capital growth won't pay the bills. Maybe you should be looking at passive income, because you've got to have passive income. Yes, capital growth can be there if you realize it, but just break it down, bring it back to the plan. Does that work for me or me and my partner, me and my family? And it'll help you block out the noise. And I didn't have that clear plan. I was like, I'm going to make millions. I'm going to do all this stuff. I've read all the books. Just slow it down, have a plan, and then just work back from there would be the key insights for myself if I was talking to the young Kane. Or younger Kane.
I love that. You sort of triggered the old memory of that famous Warren Buffett quote, Kane, where he says that wealth is a transfer of money from the impatient to the patient. I think patience is one of the absolute key ingredients of any successful and sustainable investment, whether that be in assets, business, life, you name it. Just stopping and propping and holding yourself back and getting over your ego so that you can say, okay, well, is this really going to get me to where I want to get to? With that clear vision that you've spoken about, it's absolutely key. So absolute gold. I'm going to jump straight into the ambush round and hit you up with 4 quick questions that listeners love to glean your wisdom on. And the first of those is, if you could have coffee with anyone, either dead or alive, who would you choose and why?
Such a hard question, isn't it, Bushy? If I had met you today, I might have said you, Bushy. And Bushy Martin would have been at the top, but now that I've ticked that box,
compliments are going to get you everywhere, mate.
Yeah, I have the pick number 2. But in the book, I talk about Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, aka The Rock. Huge following on Instagram, but just a sensational human being. It was a character that I looked up to when I was in those teen years, of someone that's like, a strong figure, like, his presence, but also his physical demeanor is huge. But also like successful guy, gone from adversities to triumphs, also going into acting in areas where people doubted him. I think that inspired me a lot. People said, you can't be an actor. People laughed at him when he said he was going to be bigger than Will Smith when he walked into the acting agency. And he's just defied all odds. So just an amazing human being. He's just such a gentle, kind person. That gives back. And for me, I'd love to just sit down with the guy and just pick his brain on just even talk about life in general. That'll be my probably key person.
Love that. Switching gear into the investment sphere again, what's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice you've ever received?
Yeah, and the worst advice is, and I think it's for everyone, when someone gives speculation without understanding that person's situation. Yeah. That's for everyone. I get clients all the time saying, this person or this professional said this, and it's like, but have they looked at what you're actually trying to work towards? And had it with a client recently. We looked at the whole situation, what they wanted to achieve, and we sort of put forward some suggestions. They started with a new accountant. The new accountant said, no, I wouldn't do that because you're not near retirement. And I was like, but did the accountant even go into, one, accountant's not meant to give financial advice, and it was investment related. And I said, but you said these things back here, and this works well with this, and we considered these consequences, and it covers both angles, and you are close to retirement. But it was just that bad advice for people just throwing, and you learn this we learned it in actual financial planning, having biases. So bringing my own bias that you shouldn't do that because you're not retired. And it's like, that's a bias from the accountant because he hasn't considered that individual person's needs, preferences, circumstances, which means you're giving relevant advice. And I've had this along the years. People try to influence me what they thought was best for them. And everyone wants to share what they're doing. Yeah. Because they want to tell you how good they're doing with this investment or that investment or something they've done, and they want to influence you with that without knowing your personal circumstances. And that can be extremely dangerous because I got caught up in that. Best advice. That's the tough one, Bushy. I had a few. Look, I think it comes back to the best advice was, I suppose my Uncle Keith said, if you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. Right? If you don't have a plan, you plan to fail.
Yeah.
So, and that was a big thing of just like when I was trying to do 100 things at once, eventually when I tied it back to, okay, where do I want to be? In being in business too, it's a big thing. Where do I want my business to be? Values, fundamentals, culture, financial, to support all those things. And then how does that play out from producing passive income revenue for my personal life? And where do we want to be, as a family, and where do I want to see myself? So I think that having the plan and not having a plan to fail, that was probably the best advice, because that helped me just set the narrative of what do I allow into my domain of conscious thought, and what do I entertain and what do I don't entertain.
Love that. You and I are big on habits. As I spoke offline, the old self-help wealth connection is really the secret to sustainable success. What's a personal happy habit, a rewarding ritual, or a daily discipline that you've employed over the years that contributed most to your success?
I'm a big thinker. I like crunching a few numbers, Bushy, as you could imagine. I do a few numbers, but for me, it's taking time for myself, and I've realised this more so how important it is to me since I've had a young family. Because in business, I could always work when I needed to. I could always take time out to plan for business. You got to take time to plan for the future, because day to day is so hectic. And for me, it's having those mornings. I love getting up in the morning and moving the body, getting the oxygen into the body, doing something physical exercise. Great for the mind, great for the body. It's actually proven now great for dementia, Alzheimer's. There's things called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors, that happen from increasing cardiovascular, outdoors, things that can help you maintain a stressful life. And especially if you want to be successful and push the envelope a bit, you need to have this way of balancing your health. So get moving in the morning with a physical activity, and then taking some time out before work to journal. Get clear. I'm very, very hyper-stimulated. I'm on borderline, I'd say ADHD individual, Bushy, full of energy, but I need to take the time each morning to just draw back to what do I need to do today that moves the needle forward? Where are the productive things? Whenever I assess an investment deal or opportunity for personally or for the business or for clients, I'll spend a couple of mornings in quiet crunching what it means. Does it tick all the boxes from an ethical sense, profitable sense? What are the risk factors for asymmetrical risk, of controlling downside risk? And just having a clear mind, giving myself the headspace to think clearly, because there's so much noise in the world we're in, and just giving those things a bit of attention.
Beautifully said. Look, we could talk for hours, but we need to jump into the book in next week's episode, Kane. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to share the ins and outs of your own quite inspirational personal journey so far. Before we close, if anyone listening or watching would like to ask myself or any other professionals any questions about their property approach in particular, or you'd like to further discuss anything we've chatted about today with other like-minded investors in a very safe, relaxed and no-pressure environment, feel free to join us in the Property Hub Collective Facebook community by clicking the link in the show notes. So we look forward to connecting with you and continuing the conversation there. In addition, if you'd like to confidentially delve deeper into your very specific needs or challenges, feel free to book in with me for a personal solution session by clicking the link in the show notes. And we'll look forward to enjoying a dedicated and undivided hour where I can share my 40 years of investment experience to help you solve your biggest challenges and answer your questions. We now look forward to continuing our conversation with Kane in next week's episode, where we're going to unpack the ins and outs of your new book, Find Your True North, Kane, as a means of achieving our ideal lifestyles and financial freedom. So remember to always get invested in your knowledge and your network first, and we look forward to getting invested with you again then. So thanks, Kane.
Thanks, Bushy. Thanks all the listeners. Hope you get something out of it and enjoy the discussion. Talk to you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. Make sure you subscribe to Property Hub for free. Get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's top online property show for red-hot property investing news and insights direct from industry leaders and influencers. And finally, I'll see you next time.